We continue now at the top of Daf Chavav Amid Beis Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 26b. On the previous Amid, the Mishnah said that according to Rabbi Shimon, the kometz of a karban mincha does not need to be sanctified in a vessel, but there's a machlokas amoraim exactly what Rabbi Shimon means. The first opinion is Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rabbi Chia. He says that Rabbi Shimon literally means that if one wants to do the avoda with the kometz of the karban mincha with the hand, that is fine. Then it needs to be done with the right hand. If it's done with a vessel, so then the left hand is okay. That's the first approach. The second approach is that of Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai says that as long as the kmitza is taken from a vessel, because the entire karban mincha begins in a vessel, that is sufficient. There's no need whatsoever to sanctify the kometz in a vessel. And finally, there was the opinion of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak within Rabbi Shimon that actually there is a need to sanctify the kometz of the karban mincha in a vessel, and all Rabbi Shimon meant was once it's sanctified in the vessel, it can be removed from the vessel and then conveyed and taken to the mizbeach to be burned. And the Gemara is in the middle of asking a question from a brisa. The brisa says that if the kometz is taken with the right hand and then put in the left hand, it can be returned to the left hand. And the brisa now continues, if while it's in the left hand, v'chishav alea, bein chutz l'mekomo, bein chutz l'zmano, while it's in the left hand, he has an intention, either an intention outside the proper place or outside the proper time. Outside the proper time is generally a machshava of pigul, where there'd be a liability of kares now if it becomes pigul. But in this case, since he had that machshava while it's in the left hand, so pasul v'yein bo kares, it is disqualified, but there is no liability to kares. And the brisa continues, let's say it was in his right hand, chishav aleh, when it's in his right hand, chishav aleh chutz l'mekomo pasul v'yein bo kares, so if while it's in his right hand, he has a machshava of outside the proper place, then it's disqualified and there's no kares. That's the general halacha of a machsheves chutz l'mekomo. And chutz l'zmano, if he has a machshava, an intention of outside the proper time, consuming the carbon outside the proper time, so then pigul v'chayav and olav kares, that's a regular case of pigul, and he's chayav kares divrei Rebbe Elazar of Rabbi Shimon. These are the words of Rebbe Elazar and Rabbi Shimon. And the brisa continues, v'chachamim omrim, and the chachamim say, kevan shenosno l'smol, once he places it in the left hand, pesalto matanaso, his matan is now disqualified, it is disqualified in the left hand. And the Gemara continues, my time, what's the reason for that? Mishum deboy kedusha bekli, it needs to be sanctified in a vessel, v'kevan shenosno l'smol, and since it's placed in his left hand, nasa kedam shenishbach mitzaver behema al ritzba, that's the equivalent of blood that spills from the neck of the animal to the floor. In this case, again, the kometz is being placed in the left hand, that's the same thing. V'asafo, if it's then gathered up, shepasul, it's disqualified, and that's why in this case, when it's placed in the left hand, it is disqualified. And so the Gemara continues, Mechlal, now all of this implies to Rebbe Elazar of Rabbi Shimon lobo matan kli. It sounds like it's the Chachamim who say it must be placed in a vessel, but Rebbe Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, they do not require it to be placed in a vessel. So to Yuvta de Rav Nachman, let us say this is a refutation of Rav Nachman, because he said that even Rabbi Shimon agrees the kometz needs to be sanctified in a vessel. And the Gemara says, to Yuvta, indeed, it is a refutation of Rav Nachman. The Gemara continues, Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rabbi Chia. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rabbi Chia, who says that if it's done with the hand, that's fine, but then it needs to be the right hand, Messiah. So this brisa actually supports Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rabbi Chia, because that's exactly what Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon are saying in this brisa. They're saying it needs to be done with the right hand if it's done not with a vessel. And the Gemara continues and asks, Rabbi Yanai, but according to Rabbi Yanai, again, Rabbi Yanai says according to Rabbi Shimon that a vessel is not needed at all, so leima to have a tiyufta. Let us say that this brisa is a refutation of Rabbi Yanai, and the reason for that is even though Rabbi Yanai says that a vessel is not needed, but Rabbi Yanai also says once it's taken out of the original vessel, the vessel that the karban mincha is in and the kometz is taken, it can be transferred and conveyed in any fashion. There's no need for the right hand whatsoever, and this brisa seems to indicate that the right hand is necessary. And the Gemara continues, Amar lach Rabbi Yanai will say to you, Ano da amri ketana de hector, I say like the Tana on the previous Amud, that Tana, there was a brisa brought in the previous Amud that clearly said the left hand is okay. The Gemara actually brought that as a proof against Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rabbi Chia, and V'lav Litzdadim Katani, I don't give the answer of Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rabbi Chia had an understanding of that brisa that it's Litzdadim. You have to understand that brisa disjunctively, as was explained on the previous Amud, but Rabbi Yanai will say, no, we understand that brisa according to its simple meaning, and therefore that brisa supports Rabbi Yanai. And Rashi explains, again, the Brisa said, according to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, v'chishev, if while it's in the left hand, he has an intention outside the proper place or outside the proper time to consume the carbon, kolomar, it means to say, im chishev aleh kol zman shu b'smolo, if he has these kinds of intentions while it's in his left hand, lav machshavahi, that's not really considered an intention at all. V'lav chiyuve kares ha'ochlo, and one who eats is not chayiv kares. She'ein machshava posel asel b'misha roy la'avoda, because machshava only disqualifies in a situation where the avoda is able to be done in that fashion. Usmol below kli, but the left hand without a vessel, Rabbi Shimon eino kshera, according to Rabbi Shimon, is not kosher. Kedamrinan le'el, like we said earlier, bola ovda biyad, ovda biyamin. If he wants to do the service with his hand, he does it with the right hand. And then the Chachamim said, pasalto matonoso, mashenitan besmolo, if it was put in the left hand, that's disqualified. V'shuv ein lo takona b'chazar, there's no longer a solution by returning it to the right hand. And Rashi continues, my time, what's the reason of the Chachamim, mishum deboy lekedushe bekli, because it needs to be sanctified in a vessel, v'asafo posel and sheposel, and so therefore in this case, it's similar to the case of blood that spills onto the ground from the neck of the animal. If it's gathered up, it's posel, so too here, in the left hand it is posel. And Rashi says, sheposel od la'akdishon bekli, it's completely disqualified further from being sanctified in a vessel. De'i lo have a boy od haikometz kiddush kli, lo have a mifsel. Now if this Kometz no longer required Kiddush Kli, it didn't require sanctification in a vessel, it wouldn't be possible. To have a Kedam Shenishbach Min HaKli ala Ritzbah, then it would be considered like blood that spilled from the vessel on the floor, Vasafon was gathered up Shekosher. In that case, it would be kosher. Kedam Rina Meseches Yuma Beperakot Siulo, that we say Meseches Yuma in Perakot Siulo, Nishbach Min HaKli ala Ritzbah Vasafo kosher. If it spills from the vessel to the floor and it's gathered up, it's kosher, but that is not the case in this situation. In this situation, it is similar to a case where it spills from the neck of the animal to the floor, because again over here there is a necessity for Kiddush Kli, and so therefore again, if it goes to the left hand, there is no solution. And Rashi continues, again, all of this implies that Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, they don't require sanctification in a vessel. Lo bo matan kli, they don't require that sanctification in the vessel. Di bo, because if they required that, les le takanta b'chazara, then returning it to the right hand wouldn't be a solution. Kidafarish, like we just explained, to have a lekin nishbach ala ritzba, min hatzavar shaposel, that would be like spilling on the floor directly from the neck, which is disqualified. The nafkolon mi v'lokach midam hapor, dam me hapor yikablenu, the blood has to be received from the par, v'kiddush kometz, and the sanctification of the kometz b'makom kabbalas dam. That's the equivalent of the receiving of the blood in the vessel. Usmol below kli, and if it's in the left hand with no vessel, harehi karitzba, it's like the floor. Rabbi Shimon smol b'kabbalah, because when Rabbi Shimon allowed the left hand to be used for the receiving, lo hichsher ela b'kli. Again, he only allowed that in a vessel. And then the Gemara said, Rabbi Yehuda Messiah, according to Rabbi Yehuda Breder Rabbi Chia, this brayso as a support. Because again, he said earlier, Kasha ovda biyad, when the service is done with the hand, ba'in on yamin, the right hand is needed. Hachanami katani yachzer liyamino. Here also it says it should be returned to the right hand. Lo Rabbi Yanai lema te'avet tiyufta. According to Rabbi Yanai, this brayso seems to be a refutation. Diamar afilo beheimaino, because he said on the previous Amud, he can convey it even in his belt. V'chol shekein b'smol, certainly he can convey it in the left hand. V'hacha katani yachzer liyamino. Here it says return it to the right. There does seem to be a requirement of the right. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yanai, de Amar Katana de Hector, he follows the Tana earlier, the Katani La'el, we said earlier, Hector Chalavim Ve'varim, etc. That was the Brisa brought earlier. Umachshir Avodas Kometz B'smol Ve'afilo Biyad, and that Brisa said the service of the Kometz can be with the left hand, even if it's done with the hand. V'lav Litzdadin Katani, and again, he doesn't give the answer of Litzdadin, Kedetirtza Rabbi Yehuda Breder Rabbi Chia La'el, like Rabbi Yehuda Breder Rabbi Chia answered, because that Brisa was brought against his position, where the right hand is required. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Hiktir komsa pa'amayim kasher, if the kometz is burned twice, meaning it's split in half and burned two separate times on the Mizbeach, that is kosher. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, pa'amayim, it can be done twice, it can be split in half. V'lo pa'omei pa'amayim, but it can't be several times, it can't be smaller than that. There is a minimum shear. Rabbi Yochanan says, pa'amayim va'afilu pa'omei pa'amayim, it could be split into half, but it could be split into even smaller segments and burned burned in that fashion. And the Gemara asks, "My Beinayu, what exactly is the root of the machlokus between Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan?" Amar Rabbi Zeira says, "Yesh kometz pachos mishnei zeisim, v'yesh haktara pechusa mikazayis ika Beinayu." The machlokus is it possible to have a kometz that's less than 2 zeisim? Is it possible to burn the kometz less than a kazayis? That's the machlokus. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi savar, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi holds, ein kometz pachos mishnei zeisim. A kometz is never going to be less than 2 zeisim. It's always going to be at least that amount, and therefore v'en haktara pechus mikazayis. Similarly, the burning is never going to be less than a kazayis. So you have to take the Mishnah literally. You can split the kometz in half and burn it burn it 2 times, burn it each half. And the reason why that's okay is because each half we know is going to be at least a kazayis. You have to burn at least a kazayis. Rabbi Yochanan holds yesh kometz pachos mishnei zeisim. It's possible that a kometz is less than 2 zeisim. V'yesh haktara pechus mikazayis, and therefore even if you're splitting it in half, the burning will be less than a kazayis, and that's fine. And so therefore it's okay if it's split in half. But even let's say if it's split in thirds, that would be equally okay according to Rabbi Yochanan. And Rashi explains, "Pa'amayim chetzio barishona v'chetzio b'shniya." Again, you burn half first, then you burn the other half second. V'lo pa'amayim, but you can't split it more than that. Mishnei zeisim, 2 zeisim, hilkach hayte nakan masnisin pa'amayim. If you hold that it's at least 2 zeisim a kometz, so then when the Mishnah says you could do it twice, you can split it in half. Dafka nakad. You have to assume the Mishnah means literally it has to be split in half and no more than that. Shetehei b'chol haktara kazayis. That way every burning is going to be a kazayis. V'lo pachos, but it can't be less. Dein haktara b'pachos mikazayis. You can't burn less than a kazayis. Rabbi Yochanan says yesh kometz b'pachos mishnei zeisim. A kometz can be less than 2 zeisim. V'afilu achi katani masnisin pa'amayim kashera. And nevertheless you can split in half. So you see it can be less than a kazayis, and therefore it can be split into more than just 2. It can be split in 3, etc. That also will be fine according to Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Itmar, it was stated the following: Machlokas amoroim, kometz, with regards to the kometz, when it's being burned on the Mizbeach, me'emosai mater shirayim ba'achila. At what point in time is the remainder of the karban mincha then permitted to be eaten? Again, the kometz, the burning of the kometz, is a matir to eat the remainder of the karban mincha. And so there's a Machlokas amoroim on this point. Rabbi Chanina Omer, mishemoshla boes haor. Rabbi Chanina says as long as the fire takes hold, it doesn't have to take hold of the majority, just even some of it, that's enough. Now the shirayim can be eaten. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Mishatatz boes or berubo." The fire has to take hold of the majority of the kometz, and only then is the shirayim permitted. And Rashi explains, "Me'emasai mater." When is it permitted? D'chsiv kodesh kadasha me'ishay Hashem. We learn from that, "Ein lohen chelek." They only get a portion; they're only able to eat it. Ela la'achar ishay Hashem. Only after the fire takes hold. B'toras kohanim. And so again, there's a machlokas amoraim. The first opinion, Rabbi Chanina, is mishamashla b'miksasa, when it takes hold of part of the kometz. And again, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it has to be the majority. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Yehuda l'Rabba bar Rav Yitzchak. Rav Yehuda said to Rabba bar Rav Yitzchak, Asabra loch, time of the Rabbi Yochanan. I will explain to you the reasoning of Rabbi Yochanan that it has to be the majority. It is because Amar Kra, the pasuk says, V'nei Allah kitor haaretz kitor hakivshan. It talks about the smoke of the furnace. Ein kivshan mala kitor. Now the furnace is only going to have smoke at shetatzis or baruba, when the fire takes hold of the majority. And Rashi explains, Ein kivshan mala kitor uvekometz nami. By the kometz as well, ksiv vehiktir. It uses the word vehiktir. Hilkach ba'inan kitor. Therefore, we need that smoking, and therefore, again, based on that pasuk, we require a majority according to Rabbi Yochanan, because again, it's not going to be mala kitor at shetatzis or baruba until the fire takes hold of the majority. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Ravin bar Rav Ada l'Rava. Ravin bar Rav Ada said to Rava, Amri talmidecha, your students say, Amar Rav Amram, that Rav Amram says, Tanya, that we learned in a brisa, Ein li ala devarim shedarkon li karev balayla. This is only by items which are normally offered at night. Kigon evarim upedarim, like the limbs and the fats. Shemalon umaktiron mibo hashemesh, that those are offered from, they're offered and burned after sunset. Umisachlin v'holchin kol halayla kula, and they become consumed. They're consumed throughout the entire night. Devarim shedarkon likarev bayom, but things which are offered on the mizbeach during the day, kagon hakometz v'halavona v'hakatores, like the kometz and the lavona, the frankincense, and the katores, the incense. So minchas kohanim, and the mincha brought by kohanim, uminchas kohen mashuach, and the mincha of the kohen gadol, uminchas nesachim, and the mincha brought with libations. Shemalon umaktiron mibo hashemesh. Those they are brought up and they are offered mibo hashemesh, Hashemesh, and Mibo Hashemesh sounds like it's saying after sunset. That seems like a direct contradiction. The Brisa just said, but you just said, Darkon Likarev Bayom. You just said you're listing things that are offered during the day, and then you said they're being offered after sunset, which is at night. So what does the Brisa even mean? And so the Brisa clarifies, Elo im bo Hashemesh. What the Brisa means is, things that are brought during the day, they are brought im bo Hashemesh. That means to say, right before the sunset, Shemesachlin v'holchin kol halayla, that again, they get consumed throughout the entire night. Minayin, from where do we know that? Talmud Lomer, the Pasuk says, Zos Toras ha'ola, it says Zos Toras ha'ola, Riba, and that is an inclusion. And Rashi explains, Amri Talmidecha, your students say, Talmidecha Omrim Mishmei de Rav Amram, your students say, in the name of Rav Amram, Ainli A'al Mizbeach Kol Alayla Koi. The Brisa is going on the fact that it says that these things are on the Mizbeach all night. So again, we list things that are Mibo Hashemesh, which is Achar Shabo Hashemesh. That means they're brought up to the Mizbeach after sunset. Kometz U'Levona V'chol HaKarbonos. Now with regards to the Kometz and the Levona and all Karbonos, Darkon Likarev Bayom, the general way is to bring them during the day. The nafgalon mi biyom tzavoso b'Toras Kohanim. It's learned from the pasuk biyom tzavoso in Toras Kohanim. V'lo yotza oso klal meoso klal elo evari ola. The only things that leave that general rule, that are not included in that general rule, are the limbs of a carbon ola. Sheitiran hakasa b'layla. That the pasuk permits them to be brought at night. T'chsiv al mokta, as it says in the pasuk. Evarim upedarim. Again, the limbs and the fats, the darkon likar b'layla. Those are generally brought at night. Mehaikra gufe nafka b'Toras Kohanim. That's learned from this pasuk in Toras Kohanim. And so then the Gemara again said those things during the day were im bo Hashemesh, with the setting of the sun. Kodem bias Hashemesh, that means right before the setting of the sun. And Rashi notes, Vikasha, now if you're going to ask, Hakaimalon minchasam v'niskeim b'layla, we actually have established that minchasam and niskeim, the mincha and the libations, are at night, and v'hacha taniu minchas nesachim b'yom. Here minchas nesachim is listed as something that is brought during the day. So Taretz, we can answer, Hamosiv la b'perak beis de Meseches Tamura. This exact question is asked in the second parak of Meseches Tamura. Umeshani, and the Gemara over there answers, Kan b'nesachim haboin im hazevach. If it's libations that come together with an animal carbon, so then it follows those same rules during the day. But Kan b'nesachim haboin b'fnei atzman. But if it's nesachim that come on their own, then already it is at night. And in any case, the Bryce over here has stated that the kometz can be brought up onto the Mizbeach right before sunset. And so the Gemara now asks its question, V'ha'im bo Hashemesh, but if it's with the setting of the sun right before sunset, so lo mashkachas lo shetotzit, so or barubo, the fire is not going to take hold of the majority. If we hold that the fire has to take hold of the majority of the kometz, and now this has to be done during the day, according to the Brysa, so if it's going to be right before sunset, that's not going to happen. This seems to be a question against Rabbi Yochanan, and the Gemara answers to that, Lokash, it's not difficult, kan liklot, kan lahatir. Here we're talking about liklot. Once the Mizbeach takes it, that's one thing, but lahatir, you need the majority. You don't need the majority of it to be consumed before the end of the day. That's not required. Liklot, it's fine if it's less than the majority, but lahatir, in order to permit the shirayim, that you do need the majority. And Rashi explains, V'im bo Hashemesh lo mashkachas the yotzes or barubo, with the setting of the sun, the fire will not take hold of the majority. Kodem shkias hachama, that won't happen before sunset. V'lo chashav haktora shetotzes or barubo, if it's not called being burned until the majority is taken hold of, if luhu b'shkias hachama, so it's going to be disqualified with sunset, because again it has to be during the day. And Rashi continues, liklot shetehei mizbeach kolto, if the mizbeach is going to capture it, so to speak, to take hold of it, shelo yipaso belina, that it shouldn't be disqualified through lina. Some understand Rashi doesn't literally mean the disqualification of lina, he just means in terms of what the Brisa was discussing, that it should be done during the day. Hava mishamash labo, so that's going to be from the time mishamash labo ha'or, from the time that the fire takes hold. Once the fire takes hold, that's sufficient in that regard. But lahatir shireh, but in order to permit the remainder, lo hava haktara shetotzes boha or baruba, that's not going to be called a haktara until the fire takes hold of the majority. And the Gemara continues with another answer on how to understand the Brisa. Rebbe Lozer Masni Lo, Rebbe Lozer learns mi bo Hashemesh, that in the part of the Brisa which is discussing those items that have to be offered during the day, it does say after sunset. Now the problem is, of course, those items have to be brought up before sunset. Umukim lo bepokin, but Rebbe Lozer understands that that part of the Brisa is talking about when items get dislodged from the Mizbeach so they can be brought back up. That's all the Brisa is saying. V'chein ki aser avdimi amar Rabbi Yanai, and similarly when Rav Dimi came, he said that Rabbi Yanai said, Bepokin, we're talking about when it gets dislodged from the Mizbeach. The Gemara continues and asks, Umiyama Rabbi Yanai Hachi, does Rabbi Yanai really say that? V'yama Rabbi Yanai, but Rabbi Yanai says, Ketores Shapaka Me'al Gavi HaMizbeach, the Ketores, which is one of the things listed in the Brisa, if the Ketores is dislodged from the Mizbeach, Afilu Kartan Shaba, even the significant particles of it, Ein Machzir Nosan, they don't get returned. And here Ketores is listed as something that is placed on the Mizbeach, according to this return to the Mizbeach. That contradicts what Rabbi Yanai himself said. V'tani Rav Chanina bar Menyume, b'devei Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, and Rav Chanina bar Menyume learned in the yeshiva of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Asher tochal ha'esh ha'ola al ha'mizbeach, it says the fire consumes the ola, ichulei ola tamachzer, the ola, those parts that get dislodged, they are returned, v'iyat tamachzer ichulei ketores, but the ketores, that which gets dislodged from the ketores is not returned, so the ketores in this brisa is problematic, according to this approach that the brisa is talking about pokin, and the Gemara says to that, Sami mikan ketores, just remove the word ketores from the brisa in order to answer that question. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravasi says, Ki Pasha Rabbi Elazar ben Menachos, when Rabbi Elazar was learning Meseches Menachos, Boy Hachi asked the following question, Kometz shesidro v'sidr olaves hamaracha. Let's say the kometz is placed on the Mizbeach, arranged on the Mizbeach, and the wood is placed on top of the kometz. So Mahu, what's the halacha? Derech haktara b'kach, is that a normal way to burn it? Oh, ain't derech haktara b'kach, or that's not a normal way to burn it. Teiku, and the Gemara leaves this as a question. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Elazar masni lo kedekatani le'el. Rabbi Elazar learns it the same way we learned it above, doesn't change the words of the brisa. The kometz u'levona shemalon mibo hashemish. It's talking about kometz and levona that are brought up after the sunset, but it's bepoken, it's when it's dislodged from the mizbeach, the fire spits it out and it's dislodged. The kometz u'levona hakovsin mitocha, or the kometz and the levona, they jump out of the fire, v'noflim, and they fall off the mizbeach, malino son kol halayla, they can be brought up all night. That's what the brisa means. Afilu kortin shleimim, kortin means even the significant particles, v'chashuven shaba, even the significant ones, ein machzir, and you don't return them. Uleil katani ketoris, but ketoris was listed as an item that you do return. Umuki lo iu bepoken, and again he's saying that that's talking about poken, and so again the Gemara then answered to take out the word ketoris from the brisa. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Boy Chizkiah asks the following question: A vorin shesidran v'sidra alenas hamaracha. Let's say the limbs, they're placed on the mizbeach and the wood is placed above them. Mahu, what's the halacha over there? Al ha'etzim amar achmona dafka. It says on the wood, so it specifically means on the wood, not the other way around. Dafka al ha'etzim, it has to be on the wood, otherwise it's no good. O dilmar maybe kevan d'chsiv kra achrina, since there's another pasuk which says asher tochal ha'esh ha'sa'ola al ha'mizbeach. It says asher tochal ha'esh ha'sa'ola al ha'mizbeach. Iboy hachiyavid. That pasuk indicates if you want to do it this way. Iboy hachiyavid. If you want to do it the other way, that's also fine. Take when the Gemara leaves that as a question. And the idea over here from the second pasuk is it says asher tochal ha'esh ha'sa'ola al ha'mizbeach, indicating the ola is directly on the mizbeach. That would indicate that that's fine if the wood is on top. And again, the Gemara says teku. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Boy Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha asks the following question: A varin shesidron b'tzidei ha'maracha. Let's say the limbs are arranged at the side of the wood. Mahu, what's the halacha? Aliba demand damar al mamish lo tiboylach. According to the one who says al means it actually has to be on top of the wood, that's not a question. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph.